that one of the things that I'm going to keep going back to the theme of not taking everything personal. I recall in Detroit when I got one of my first negative editorial, and it was really devastating. And on the one hand, I simply wanted to say I'm not going to ever speak to that editorial writer again. But after some reflection, thinking back on how my mentors would have handled the situation, I had some media training and some school improvement programs. I mean, then you face up to, if there's a misunderstanding or if you see the world differently from the way this editorial has been written, the only way the two of you are going to get on the same page is through conversation. And I picked up the phone and set up a lunch meeting with the reporter, and it changed the relationship. It didn't mean that we were always in agreement, but we were always respectful. And we always, from that point on, he always had a conversation with me before he wrote. I also think that sometimes the coverage we get is not complete, because if something is really important to you, then if you want a reporter to write about it, you should spend some time with them before they write. You should meet with the editorial board and let them ask questions. We send out a press release and expect them to get everything right, and we haven't done any homework with them. And I've just found if you do your homework, you get much better coverage.
Yeah, because one thing one thing they still pride themselves on, and this is the media, electronic and print, is accuracy. Now, I think they change the definition of what balance is, and that varies according to the issue and the people upon whom they're reporting. But accuracy, reporters and throughout the industry, they still have some pride there. I've got a larger context for the media that really overarches what we do in school districts and communities. That is that I believe the media has moved deliberately and very carefully to the right. And I raised the question, if the right is in the middle, where's the left? And I mean this in classical left and right terms. If the right is holding down the middle, where's the left? And what that has meant, as I've seen it nationally, these, was it Star and the Inquirer, all of those trash type of papers, I have seen credible newspapers, New York Times, compete with them. I mean, when the story came out on Clinton, it was from the internet. And this guy was sitting at the table with renowned reporters across the country. And it's because the media, as we know it, particularly local newspapers and national ones, see some of their competition from these, and they see a market out there, and so they've reduced the terms of what good journalism is to compete with these folks who don't have any sense of journalism in order to have one. And at the local level, it's something, Debbie, you talked about, that we have to continue to work with them, not with any expectation there's going to be long-term agreement, but we have to look at them as a high-maintenance relationship. We've really got to look at them as a high-maintenance relationship.
Yet another.
But one,
that's a good point,
you have an education reporter. That education reporter goes out of town or isn't covering. We have a reporter that really doesn't have a clue about the relationship that you've already built with this. You've got to spend hours sometime, just hours sometime, working with that person just to get them up to speed, and knowing that person is not one who has dealt with those editors for this news article as much as his or her counterpart who is out of town. So the editors are saying, do this, ask them this, ask them this. We're saying, this is these are our messages, this is our story, and you go back and forth. I mean, we just did this with our budget, which the board passed with hardly any exception. And what happened was that the regular reporter was out of town. The person who covers City Hall took on the editorial, the education reporting for a 2-week period of time, and I knew that meant he had to rely more upon his editors than the other reporter, and that meant that we had to get our game up
You got a school.
to a higher standard than what we would normally do to get the messages right and to get, the facts right. But it does pay dividends, because that's where your board would want to see themselves being reported with pride and being board-like, that they have protected the interests of taxpayers, and protected the interests of students. So I think it's a huge undertaking, but there's no way that we can capitulate here.
One way, this is a very simple thing. When I met with, there were 2 papers in Detroit, and they all had education writers. Even the electronic media had education reporters assigned to the school system.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't go into a high visible media territory and sit back and say, I'm not going to engage. They're going to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing I asked them was to do what I call bookends. For every positive story, for every negative story, because they don't have a problem finding negative stuff. And if you know that you have a school system that isn't perfect, and no one has one that's perfect, there's gonna be negative stories. You should run something positive on the system. And what they all basically said to me is no one in the system helps them find positive stories. So I said, we will inundate you with positive things about the system, so that there isn't any question that you don't have something to cover. And so if you're not out there feeding to them what you want the community to know about the school system, you can't really blame them if they're not proactive and aggressive and only cover every negative thing that happens in a school system. And then most of the stuff that happened is negative. 50 or 60% of it doesn't happen in the school. It's some kids that do something on the way to school, 3 blocks from school, because they're K-12, because they're school-age kids. They're yours. This is, again, feeling responsible for everything. The kids did this stuff on Saturday afternoon on their block, but they're our kids.
Let me pick up on that for a minute. What happened on that same example was that there was a student who allegedly committed a crime during the summer. He was arrested in the fall. And what came out as a headline was less to do with that student, but the name of that high school. Okay?
No other affiliation than
No
church.
Right, exactly.
Boys Club.
No.
Member of, Zion Baptist.
No.
Marshall High School. So what I did, I went back and, talked to my spokesperson and my communications team. And we began to think through that this hasn't been the first time. We went back into the record. We had citations and references where this has occurred. And then we looked into the county section of the newspaper to see where it had not occurred, meaning naming the high school, but a youth was picked up and arrested for, and sat down with the publisher, and sat down with the vice president and all the other key individuals, along with the mayor, a member of the business community, and a member of the clergy, to let the newspaper know that I'm one of your customers now, and they are your customers. And you need to come to terms with what the evidence shows over a period of time, where the district and the city is getting, we're both getting the same kind of pejorative reporting, where districts in the county are not. And, the joke went around very quickly that, a black man could be arrested. He could be 50 years old. They'd still name the school.
Because they said, the community can identify with the school. If they would say that the person was injured on 3rd and Main Street, say average person, I know, but if they would name a school, people can identify with schools, because we question the same thing. But I want to take it to another level out of the personal structure, what's happening in Dayton or Rochester, whatever. But looking at, back to your point, and looking at African American superintendents as a whole, and I think you raised a question, or someone raised a question, do we receive different reporting from the electronic and print media as a whole across the country? We have 160 African American superintendents. I've never seen anyone write about racism in this profession at our level. I've never seen it. And it's probably the most segregated organization in the country. But do we get a fair shot with the media from a holistic standpoint, from where you sit as a professor at Harvard University and running the superintendent's?
And Bob, if I could tack on to that, if when we do, because I think there are cases where we do, and I think I'm an example of where I got excellent treatment. I mean, even when they disagreed with me, I mean, people were
afraid of you.
fair. No, I mean, I think and I admit this to everyone, over the long period of time with all of the crap I've been involved in this community, some of which has been pretty well, I've for whatever reason, I felt like people have always given me a fairly square deal. So I guess my question was, is that more of an outlier thing, Bob? That these examples of, say, maybe what happened with Debbie, what happened to you, what happened to me, in general being fair, is that an outlier for most African American superintendents?
Well, Deborah just described the process of working, what I call working the media. And I think probably most of the people in this room are reasonably good at it. I mean, you know it's a high maintenance relationship and you work at it. I'm talking about the folks who may not choose to, don't want to, or whatever, versus who are black versus those who are white, who have similar sort of distance from the media. And I would argue, yeah, that there's a heavier scrutiny, more of those kinds of questions about where you go on your travel and the like happen to black and Latino superintendents, at least the ones that we've examined. I just think a lot of people are getting a whole lot better at it. We have media training for the whole 2 years that people are with us at Harvard. We bring in the newspaper reporters, we analyze the articles, we make people do mock presentations and bombard them with hostile. I mean, so we want people to be really, really good at it. So I think my answer up close with respect to watching, let's say, Boston is, yeah, I think that the Boston Globe beat on the two black superintendents in ways they did not equally beat on other inadequate white superintendents. If you're going to call these people, these people didn't get their contracts renewed. These other superintendents didn't get their contracts renewed. Much different treatment of the African American superintendents in Boston than their white counterparts. And remember, both of these superintendents lasted longer than 7 of their predecessors.
And the lingering effects it has on the black superintendent. Oh yes, it follows you from door to door.
Yeah, I mean, see, that's a good point, because I want to go back to this dude, I don't know if we can be using names here, but the guy who was a superintendent, he got fired or left out in California somewhere, left them in financial ruin, got hired in Kansas City or whatever.
Oh yeah.
And,
Right.
Oh, Rivers.
Yeah, right. But I'm just saying, I mean, the question is, at least,
he left 3 communities in financial ruin.
Right.
Or disarray.
Right, but was always able to find another community.
Got hired.
Reinvented himself.
Right, and I'm just
Aided and abetted.
right, and I'm just wondering, whether or not that's even possible for an African American superintendent.
No, one of the superintendents that I'm talking about here was literally dogged by this coverage in his attempts to get another superintendency.
Sat up for a year, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
At least a year, right?
Yeah. Right. Now this was an accomplished person, had other superintendencies,
Other states.
Set the ground for lots of work in Rochester and in Berkeley. I mean, good superintendent. Took a full year. The other individual we're talking about had a job.
Yeah.
Just
immediately.
moved on.
Right. I mean, to me, that's, when we are trying to talk about the race part of this, and I know we're trying to do it in a way where we're not crying wolf, like every situation is because of race, but really trying to define where we think that that's real and how that plays out. Because, again, I think it is real in various situations, and I think it's up to us to try to talk about it in a substantial way, but in a way that's honest, as opposed to just some broad sweeping charge.
One way we could, I think, talk about it is how each of us define success in our own superintendency. and see if there would be any differences or similarities in those definitions.
Well, you know, I hope when we do that though, Debbie, I mean, and we need to explain is that we had invited more women here for a variety of reasons they were not able to come. But I think we don't want to leave this without also talking about how gender has played a role in it, both from the standpoint of an African-American male, you know,
As a leader of a female profession?
Mm-hmm.
right, and what happens to African-American males in general in American society. But then the other side is, you know, what did it mean, for example, to be a woman as a superintendent of what, the 4th largest school district in the country?
I guess I try not to think about it a great deal, because I was the first woman deputy assistant superintendent in Cambridge, and the first woman deputy in Milwaukee, and the first woman in Detroit. And I think I thought about it more in the other 2 positions. And even people that it didn't matter to, they just said, you know, this is the first time I'm working for a woman. And we need to figure out how to do that, because I haven't done it before. But the only example that just will never leave me was my first cabinet meeting. And to this day, I don't believe men would have ever said this to John Porter or Art Jefferson. But one of the men on my cabinet had the nerve to ask me if we would vote. Vote to make decisions. I said, yeah, you can vote if you want to vote. That's up to you. But I get input from you, and I make the final decision. I don't care whether you vote or not. But I think it was an attempt to see how naive is she. And, you know, can we control this? I just don't think they would have even put that question on the table to a male superintendent. Now, you guys could say somebody challenged you, and I'd be wrong.
No, I don't want to comment on your career too closely here, but I think that people tried to take advantage of you in your contract when you applied, because they thought you were a young woman superintendent and you'd go for anything to get your superintendency. As I look at the newspaper articles, they talk about your clothes more than they talk about, you know, any man's clothes. I mean, I don't think that's particularly a black woman issue, but it certainly is a gender issue. And no, nobody ever, I mean, you were on my cabinet meeting, nobody ever said we're gonna vote. I mean, they didn't read you very well. I don't think.
This was the first meeting, and I think
this book by Susan Chase on the work narratives of women superintendents interviews about 12 women. None of them pay a lot of attention to sexism.
You just you ignore it, you get over it.
They just go on about their business.
You do have to tell some people, you know, I'm not your mother, I'm not your girlfriend, I'm not your sister. So this is a different relationship, but we want to learn how to make this work.
Well, like the dude who came up.
I knew you were going to tell this. I was not going to tell this story. He loves this story.
Well, I won't tell it.
No, you can tell it. That was clearly a
nobody
gender
ever
role.
asked me as a superintendent or never told me that I had nice legs. I mean, but the fact that
Well, you don't.
And I immediately sent him a letter on sexual harassment.
You did?
Yes, I did. And it got all over the district. And I never, this issue about personal appearance, because most people see women visually and think they have the right to say whatever they want. Did never happen again.
No matter what the thinking might have
They might have been thinking a whole lot of stuff, but they didn't say anything to me. And you're right. It's like, and it's not men doing this. Even female reporters will write about she has a French manicure. What does that have to do with being a superintendent?
Right. But you know, one of the things on the other side of this gender thing, but I think it's probably more race than it is black male. You know, in some ways, like I found this when I went to the state with the reputation I went up there with, that one of the advantages that I had, it turned out, is that when people see you as a black man, or maybe black people generally, and you're able to like speak English or write or something, they're like, oh, you know, so, I mean, they give you...
James is arrogant and articulate.
Right. But in essence, because the expectation of you is so low, that when you come in and you're able to think, or people see that you can actually talk, or you can listen and figure out what's being said. I mean, there's this level of amazement that you're able to do that.
There's a flip side to that too, and that is, I've always believed for particular segments within this country that their worst enemy is an intelligent, independent, thinking and acting African-American male.
The
And it's
T-shirt
ve-
just says an educated black man.
Right. And it's very threatening to them because they don't have the traditional boxes into which they're usually placed.
Right.
There's not an expectation that we can do finance.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
There's not an expectation that we can work effectively with the media. There's not an expectation that we can manage the emotional and social challenges that come in without overreacting. There's not an expectation that we're going to be able to do lots of collaboration with elected officials and not get drowned into their agenda so we lose ours. But when you do that, it does become threatening to segments of communities and across this country. And that flip side we have to be prepared for too.
I had a school board member tell me that his concern regarding me as superintendent was that I would not be able to handle disruptions in schools. And I said,
This
tell
is
me.
in Milwaukee.
This is in Milwaukee. I said, tell me the last time a superintendent personally went to a school to stop a fight or a riot or some other disruption in a school.
But it was also the reason that I transferred the security department to your office.
You make
Well,
I did that.
of course, I didn't want to be out there in the school and fight so back out.
So
But,
then people had to-
people complain bitterly about, well, she's a woman. She can't.
And she's a
never,
woman, and
got
she's
no
short.
background. She
I mean,
can't.
she's little.
She can't do this. I said, you're gonna have to. I said, one, I'm not gonna pay attention to it. Two, she's got other areas that are more important than this one in the district. And three, it's part of our agreement. She wants to be a superintendent of schools. How are you gonna be a superintendent of schools if you don't have some of the areas that aren't quite so glamorous and that you don't have to deal with it? But people's expectations were that was not her area. That should be somebody else's area.
Somebody
She
big
should have
and
curriculum.
tough and.
Right.
And then she went and appointed a black woman as head of security.
Right.
So then they knew for sure that she shouldn't have had the thing from the jump.
Yeah, right.
I did learn something new from what Bob said about the superintendency. You used the word glamour. There are parts of the superintendency that are glamorous.
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, which ones were they? I missed them. What were they?
You mean only in Milwaukee or across the board, across the country?
No, anywhere.
There are great things about the city.
No, that's great. I want to know about the glamorous.
Glamorous.
The ceremonial.
The
It's-
ceremonial
I mean,
nature of it.
Because some superintendents, back to something you said, actually
still don't know.
believe that all they're supposed to do is be the symbolic leader of the district. And that all of their staff really does everything else and is in charge of everything else. And I show up for whatever, the meeting with the mayor, the meeting with this group, that group, go to the board meetings, and you do all the talking on the issues because I didn't research them and I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, that's
And that is a perception of what the superintendency is for some people.
And there are some very successful. I know of one in a very large school district back on the East Coast. That's his mode of operation. And the deputy is the key. And this man is very successful in one of the few school districts of wealth with an African American leader, and this is his operation.
Yeah.
I want to get back to the question you asked, because on how we are perceived. One of our up-and-coming African-American female superintendents, and Cliff was present at this meeting, and we asked a question, and we had one of the top consultants, white consultants, in the room with us in the country. I would say he's one of the top out of whatever number we want to pick, and he's from this area where this young lady was taking over the superintendent. And we asked, how did her first press conference go? In his first statement, she was very articulate.
Mm-hmm.
First statement.
Mm-hmm.
And we looked at each other. She was
Right,
very
picked it up right away,
articulate, right away. And that stereotyping, getting back, if we are educated, we can speak correctly and all those things, we'll question. But
They react, when people say that, it's actually, from coming from them, it's a compliment, but because you hear it all the time as the first thing they say, you don't view it as a compliment.
Well, it is Dr. Deborah McGrath.
That's what I mean. It's like,
so
why would I not be articulate?
but they don't describe the
But,
other.
And nobody else,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Even if they are not
Yeah,
articulate.
if they're not articulate, they don't describe them that way. But getting back to the gender issue, I'm very proud of several things in Dayton, a lot of things. One thing, the majority of my executive staff are females. And it's not by design, it's by qualifications. They have very good credentials, and it's a female profession. I'm finding more females are moving to the doctoral level than males. And more females are interested in becoming superintendents than males.
My
in
my
that area.
applicants are 4 to 1 women to men.
And I see this trend changing, but it's very threatening to some of the males within, say in Dayton, Ohio, because the word is out now. If you're not a female, you don't get a job in James Wills administration.
That was the word in my administration too.
Right.
Not only do you have to be female, but you got to be short.
Yeah, but because I like to come back to the extent to which that is also a reflection of a problem that we have. I mean, I was just talking to a bunch of kids the other day, 7th and 8th graders, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders who were interested in going into teaching. There was room for about 50 kids. There was only about 3 boys in there. And so, on the one hand, I think it represents a positive. On the other hand, I like to talk about to what extent is that a part of another kind of problem that we have. But before we get to that, I wanted to raise something. I don't know if Cliff or Bob, if you want to respond to it. I had raised this issue about the expectation, but it seems like there's 2 kinds of expectations that seem to be running on 2 different tracks. I remember when William Julius Wilson wrote his book, Declining Significance of Race, and he got beat up by a lot of people who never read the book because they thought what he was saying was that race was of no significance. But he wasn't saying that. He was talking about what role does class play in really determining people's life chances as things have changed. But in one part of that book, he talked about how it is that he was raising the question that black people were going to become mayors of cities at the point that you no longer had a infrastructure, you no longer had a tax base, et cetera, so that they were going to, move these black people into these situations. And when you move in there, and black people have this expectation that you're going to be able to really do something different. But because you get in there and you really have nothing to work with, in some ways things become worse. And so then people become very cynical because they're saying, oh man, we were better off when we had a white person in there than when we got you in there. So on the one hand, they put this level of expectation on us that we can go in and do all of this stuff with fewer resources, with hostile this and hostile that. And then when you're unable to do it, it becomes a way to say we knew they couldn't do it, but it puts you in an impossible situation in the first place. Do you all see any of that kind of stuff operating around the country?
It's pervasive in urban districts, and it's no accident that we are continuing to be called upon to deliver something that.
Hugh predicts it in here.
Right.
1980.
Right.
That's what he said. It's one of the future of the superintendents.
Right.
You're going to get these districts,
When
nothing's
they're-
going to be on the table.
Right. I mean, we're getting them now. We're going into a 2nd generation of court cases with special education. I mean, many of them are 18, 20 years old, and they're looking at them to be renewed if you're not really exiting out of the case. So I think that places a special burden upon what we talked about earlier in terms of preparation, knowing that these conditions very different than those that occurred 20, 25 years ago. And the cities are different, and the regions are different, and abuse is up, and all of that. So it really means the level of preparation and level of coalition building and partnerships that need to be in existence and need to be supported over time is not the exception anymore. It's the norm, and you have to maintain that over time and not treat it as, you know, something at the edges. It's a whole different approach, but that doesn't mean student achievement is any less possible or doable. It just means that there's a level of focus that we have to maintain, that you can't let these other things just get in our way, what we talked about with the contracts and union issues.
But there are certain districts in this country that we are not going to become superintendents as African Americans. And
Fairfax?
Fairfax County probably will never hire an African American, but we could name them, you know, because there's 16,000 and only 160 of us African Americans.
But on the other hand, I never thought Montgomery County would hire an African
And
American.
at that time, I didn't either, but
Yeah, but so it might happen.
but it might happen, but the possibilities are very slim. But I want to get back to the mayors. Let's name the African American mayors mentally, and then look at the economic base in those cities. And getting back to what Hugh Scott said, you know, we are sent into the places that are just about impossible. Because I look at it this way: you have a hole that is 10 feet deep, and you have 6 feet of dirt, and you have to educate children with that. I'm just using this as an example. Then they raise it another level. You're still in that hole. So they come back and say, well, we've given you all these resources now, and you still have not gotten out of that hole. I would like to see the time when we can go in where you're out of the hole, and you're given the resources, and you're given the authority to run a city as a mayor, or run a school district as a superintendent. Because we get the opportunities, but they're in places. You come to Ohio, you know, Cleveland is a big discussion in Ohio. Cleveland is in $140 million worth of debt in the school system. Cleveland is looked at as being a takeover. The mayor is supposed to run Cleveland. And then you come to Dayton, Ohio, and where we're financially solvent for 7 consecutive years. But you don't hear about that because one legislator said to me, where are y'all getting this money from to balance your books? I said, good management. But we're not supposed to be good managers. Right. Like you said, we're not supposed to be good managers. But you're correct. Your mayors are in situations where they're impossible to pull out. Washington, D.C., when Good was the mayor of Philadelphia. Rizzo was probably one of the worst mayors in the history of Philadelphia.
And police chiefs.
And police chief, and he didn't do anything, but Good came along and got all of the negative issues based on his administration, and they've not had an African American since Good left 10, 12 years ago.
You know, some of the cities are not hiring African Americans. I mean, if you look at Philadelphia, Boston, well, I mean, they've kind of run. It's almost as if they've run through that representation. And okay, y'all, as you said, y'all had your shot, and that's going to be it. So,
Is it on that point? Is it easier now for a white superintendent to cross over than it is for a superintendent of color, particularly African American and Latino, to cross over into?
Are you using crossover, using the kids in the district as a definition of the district's racial characteristics?
That's correct.
Oh, it's if it's only 160 of us, it is obviously that they cross over. And I don't know how many of us are in predominantly white districts, but probably very few.
And the majority of that 160 in the southern states, Mississippi, South Carolina, Michigan. It's a high number in Michigan, I think, of African Americans. But then you get into states like Ohio, where you have 5 of us. And that's it. Right. And out of 611, and that 611 is left out of 606. They're not going to hire.
I don't think there are any in Massachusetts anymore.
But do you all see
Martha's Vineyard.
if that counts. But do you all see, I mean, maybe I should ask this question, but a pool question at all?
A what?
I mean, a pool question.
What do you mean?
What do you mean?
Availability.
Availability.
I'm just gonna say it in this way, you know, I run a doctoral program, and one of the problems that we have is that when our students finish their internship, so they've been in the program a year and a half, they are hired, either by the district they're in, or another district reaches over and snatches them up. So they're moving up to deputies and superintendents and the like, or if they have lesser experience, executive assistant to the superintendent or whatever. There is such a vacuum out there, according to the superintendents, that we have trouble keeping them in the track to finish because they're moving out. And if you talk to the search consultants, when they call me and tell me who's on the list for all the districts, it's the same 10 people.
Right.
It's the same 10 people. So, you know, they've got 2, 3 African Americans, a Latino, 4 or 5 whites, and you know, I said, well, what about beyond that? I said, well, who, you name them. You know, and I go through my names, you know, and you know, that's it. So I think it's really an opportune time for people to rise up and get that kind of experience and training and to move to the superintendency. Because I think there's another, you know, these mayors are taking greater and greater responsibility, something we haven't talked about a whole lot, but, you know, White's taken over, Menino's taken over Boston, essentially. Giuliani's just about controlling New York City.
Daley in Chicago.
Daley, I mean, they're going to be looking for leadership. You know, the reason that Rudy Krug gets along with Giuliani is that Rudy Krug knows how to run a school system. He too was a finance major, so he knows, he balanced his books in New York City. He's politically savvy. He's smart, he's tough, and tough enough not to have to fight the mayor over resources. So what's happened? His budget's gone up.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else's budget gets cut. His budget goes up.
And see, some people don't realize that one of the frictions is back to who's in charge. And because the districts are independent of city government, rather than collaborating with the mayor's office, not that you're obligated to, but it's good politics to do it. People get into wars over who's more important in the city. You know, the mayor's office, city council, or the school district, which is absolutely ludicrous. And if you have a board that wants to play let's fight City Hall, and a superintendent who wants to fight City Hall, one, because they all have some political aspirations after they leave the educational arena, this is not educating kids.
What I told my board, they wanted me to fight the mayor because the mayor had beaten up the school district so badly in cartoons in the newspaper. And I said, not only am I not going to fight him, I'm going to become mayor of Rochester when I want to leave the superintendent.
Like my friend here?
Now, we get back to the pool issue. You know, I think the pool is small based on sitting superintendents moving around, and that's what a lot of school districts are coming out. They want us to leave and come to their school district. But I think the pool is large among female superintendents, candidates at least. I can name 5 or 6, 7 females right now across the country that I would highly recommend to any headhunter, but they're not looking for that type right now. And
Remember, women have cut from 4% to 8% over the last 5 years, so.
But the 12 districts that are open now that I know of, I don't think they will hire female deputy coming into the position from outside. And not saying that's good or bad. I think it's bad. They want to just recycle some of us to go into the school district.
Yeah, but that's the mentality of some boards. There is also, we didn't talk about in the career path, there is an unspoken rule that you go to a smaller district to get a big city district, and that many big city districts will not hire you. I mean, for me to have gotten Detroit coming out of a deputy position was unique. I mean, you can come out of a deputy position internally, but you don't usually do that from the outside.
I agree.
Well, what about, you know, trying to move this a little bit, because you had posed the question of how do you define success? And I think, you know, one of the things you had raised, Cliff, was, you know, what does success look like in an urban school district for the millennium and beyond? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, I was forced to define it because I had a goal that said to guarantee student success. And whenever you do something like that, there's always somebody who says, what do you mean by success? And I came up with 4 things. And one, I expected kids to graduate from high school prepared to go to college without having to take remedial courses. I expected kids who went directly into the world of work to have the skills that they needed to be successful and to have a job that would allow them to have mobility within their career and not just an entry-level dead-end job. Third, I wanted some of the kids to develop an entrepreneurial spirit so that they had some ability to begin to jumpstart the economy in Detroit and create wealth for their community and employment for their community. And then for all of the kids, I wanted them to have some sense of social responsibility so that they gave something back to their community. And then I looked at what we were doing in terms of curriculum and instruction, in terms of whether or not it led to those types of outcomes for the kids who went through the system.
That's interesting, because I had some similar goals.
Yeah, I kind of know how you got there.
I kind of know how you got some of yours too.
So it's a combination of all these good minds on this side of the table working
And I take it
together.
a little, and I agree with that because, in our mission statement, we want to guarantee 100% success. So we want college, military, the world of work, and the kids to be successful. But then also we take it to the business aspect of it. I also look at success on management skills because I take great pride in my management skills to have the skills to run a large organization. So I would look at success from that standpoint to see if we have the resources to support the academic pieces that you just mentioned, and to make sure that we are able to adjust our budget to make sure that we can give the teachers and administrators and the students and the parents those resources that are needed in order to deal with those issues. And there's a third piece dealing with success is more in collaboration, bringing the community together. I take great pride in bringing the business leaders, the lay community, the ministers, the teachers, the students, and those components together to a certain extent. There are some out there that don't think that those things are happening the right way within the Dayton school system, but I think we should look at success from that standpoint also. So I look at the 3-pronged academic success that Deborah mentioned. We should look at the management success and then the collaborative piece as success.
See, I did it differently. I had 3 other goals, which was to create schools of the future, to have organizational effectiveness, and to also enhance customer satisfaction. But those 3 things were all aimed at guaranteeing student success and getting these schools. So it didn't matter that these 3 things were wonderful if I wasn't
If you didn't
being
do the
able to
other.
do these
Right.
things for kids. That was the only reason you did the other 3.
Right.
What we did in Rochester was the benchmark work that we started 3 years ago. We, 2 years into that 4-year process, stepped back to see whether or not we had the right ones. We did an assessment, we brought in some folks from the community to do that in our behalf. And we found out several things. One, that we had not been clear enough about the difference between a true quantifiable benchmark and what are a set of enablers that help you get there. We had 29, and some of them, as you may have seen, were truly enablers to get the kids where they should be versus benchmarks. So we cleaned it up, and they said they weren't rigorous enough, and we're cleaning that up. And thirdly, that we had too many, and it created a problem for organizational focus. We had 29. We're going to reduce them for the next 4-year round. So we're taking all of those things as lessons learned, and we're actually in the process now of crafting a whole new set of 4-year benchmarks beginning in 99-2000 and using 98-99 as a year when we're going to capture baseline data for the new, more rigorous benchmarks that we're going to set for the next 4 years. We are always mindful that we don't want to overpromise and underdeliver and get into that problem. But I think the more important piece for us now is taking a look at performance in a more international context. So the debate doesn't become, you know, Dayton, Ohio versus Rochester, Detroit versus New York City, upstate, downstate, you know, urban versus suburban. It really looks at, you know, Singapore and the best work that's coming out of Japan and so on. And people really need to see themselves in that context. So we're bringing in Smith. He's coming in later on in the week, later on in the month, to do an address about what's really out there and the results of the TIMS report. But I would look at it in three dimensions. One, individual success, looking at student profiles. Two, looking at district success as an organization. Because we've got to come to terms with the fact that while we're making progress, the change that takes place in the business and industry community is being done at a faster rate than we are making progress. So while reading scores, you know, we can all testify to that, the rate of change in the real world is outpacing the level of progress that we're making. So we're continuing to increase this gap, and so the district as an organization needs to be mindful of that. So we need that kind of benchmarking work done on the district's capacity to move. And then the third dimension is, you know, really in the community. You know, we've got to work with the mayors to improve the tax base. We've got to be, you know, very clear about choice jobs versus just jobs. We've got to have our social service community not just do pocket stuff, but address the neediest of the needy and look at that from a family context all the way through school, as opposed to just saying, you know, we're going to get, you know, something at the elementary level, and then somehow that family fixes itself on its own when it comes to middle school. We've got to take that kind of long-term approach and concentrate our efforts there so the community is in fact able to stabilize itself over time. So I'd say individual, organizational, institutional, and then some stuff in the community at large. And we've got very clear indicators of what's not there, knowing that you know, prisons are now being made for profit, and if they're being seen as institutions of profit, it only means that the more people in there, the more money you know, they're going to make if they're in that kind of mold. So we've got a lot of work to do.
We need to take a break so that the people can come in. They've been out there for a while.
So
And
you want to take a shot at this question?
I've been just trying to get your attention.
Oh,
Are you
boy.
going to do something
Can we-
on this success?
I just want to talk about community a little bit, because I'm not
Right.
arguing any of these things that happen. But I can't say I disagree with any of the issues raised here. Most of my idea of success revolves around issues of student achievement issues, and I lean more towards the college preparation, subsuming the work issue under there, and making people prepared is a concern for me. But I think if one were successful, if I would consider myself successful, it would really be also embedding all of this in a community that had been educated and had accepted the belief in the educability of these kids, so that it was sustained beyond my comings and goings, for that matter. So the community itself would have ownership of these goals and the resources and monitor the use of them, and that they'd be organized in a way that would effectively mandate that these goals would be sustained over a period of time. I mean, we talked today about what Milwaukee's going through over erasing, if you want to call a legacy. Well, it's not a legacy. In fact, it's a program that several of us on here laid out for children that we thought had some promise, and so I can't consider myself successful if that legacy doesn't continue long enough for a cycle of children to go through it and come out the other end. And if I were to return to the superintendency, that would be the kind of thing that I would be pursuing, that this community would have, this community or another community would have a greater respect for the children they are in, and the expectations that they would fulfill these many things that my colleagues talked about.
So I think I agree with all of those things as well. I think two things I'd like to discuss or put on the table. One of them is that I still feel that there is no position like being a superintendent in terms of what it allows you to do in establishing a relationship with kids. So one of the, my things about success kind of played out for me just when I walked out in the hall, that there's still kids out there, Dr. Fuller, what's happening? So that I think I was able to make a connection to kids in a very real way. But it was part of a conscious strategy, but it was also the fact that you're on TV and kids know you and you're out in the community and this and that. So I felt like establishing that relationship was very, very important to me. But one of the things that Bob just said is that, I'd like some reaction to is I've sort of, I don't know if I understand it better, but it's clear to me that if you're trying to make a cultural change in an organization, the size of a school district, the amount of years that it would take to really have that occur. And one of the values, I think, of a period that we had in Milwaukee that people have a right to change was, even though there was a change in superintendents, I think there was enough respect that we had in some of the relationships we had to actually continue the core of what we were talking about doing, which gave us a fairly sustained period, maybe somewhat like you have, James, by virtue you've been there 8 years. Because, just the idea of saying that you have a entity that says all children can learn, that seems simple enough, but when you were fighting against a prevailing view that it's the poverty, it's all of these things that prevent kids from learning, when you really come in with a whole nother attitude, in spite of the fact that people say, yeah, it's clear that a significant number of people still don't buy it. Right. And it takes a long period of time before that really becomes the operating philosophy. But what's interesting about it is that if somebody comes in before this really takes hold, or while it's still like this, and they come in and say, those kids are poor, this or that, you can see almost immediately that people begin to go back to that way of operating. So I'm struggling in my own mind to understand how long does it really take where a broad philosophical view, not a specific program, but a broad philosophical view can really take hold, in a school district.
See, I want that community. I want the community when people try to make that change to be strong enough to say no. Right. No, that's the path that my child needs to walk down to get to all this good stuff we've talked about. You can't do that. Teachers to say, we're not going to give up on whatever it is because that's the way. And we know that's the way, and we're just not going to change it because you're here. And until we get communities that strong, none of us can have a tenure any longer. I mean, there are times when you could do 15 years, and maybe you will do 15 years, James, or Cliff, maybe you will. But that sustenance of a well thought out, rigorous agenda for children needs to be sustained by community as well as by leadership.
Well, I think what's important for you to know, Bob, is that there still is large pockets in this system that are saying no, that they're not going back.
Oh,
yeah,
good.
I mean, that are saying, hey, no, this, I mean, both inside the district and outside of the district, who are saying any kind of agenda that turns that back, we're not accepting that.
See,
and so I just want you to know that that there is there.
because I don't think there's sufficient will or capacity in any district on its own to sustain that embrace of a belief system that kids can learn at a higher level. And so on the outside, I think you need these compelling forces to keep the kind of accountability on the district and groups within the district, because otherwise there's no real compelling reason for people to change. I mean, other than goodwill, and we have goodwill, we've got good teachers in room 210 and good math teachers, but district-wide, there are just too many opportunities for people to remain comfortable and not have a sense of urgency to move that agenda.
I think the 12 years I've been in Dayton and 8 as a superintendent, the biggest challenge under my tenure was the changing of the boards, of the board at least. I believe, and not saying the board that I'm presently working with is not capable of, but the board that started this whole systemic reform process. And it's very interesting because 1989, when the word strategic plan was the buzzword going around, and we actually developed a strategic plan with the broad-based community that was very visionary. And we laughed at it because some of the things that came out of the planning process, some of the strategies, we thought were ridiculous at that time, but it came from the community. And now, we're right on target because those things are sort of where we are today, and talking about entrepreneurship, choice, and all of those issues, so that buildings being self-sufficient, financially self-sufficient, site-based management, all those things. But in changing board members, the time that you spend as a superintendent trying to bring them up and get them to buy into issues, just like charter schools. Charter schools is nothing new based on our strategic plan because we talked about choice. But to get them to see that this was a choice within our strategic plan, we're still not there.
Yep.
They looked at it as something else being added on, and I'm looking at it as an extension of the plan. So my challenge was different board members, although and we're still on course today based on what we said we were going to do strategically. Our biggest challenge was getting it out of strategic mode into an operational mode where we come back to this document that's controlled in the district, which is the union contract and board policy. And I don't want to leave out board policy, but there's some policies there are no policies out there for academic excellence. Everything we have in our policy book is a punishment if you do this. These are the consequences, or this is how you should do that. There's nothing talking about academic excellence. So being in the district a long time, if you could maintain the same board, I think we could move the agenda much faster and keep the community engaged. Because I don't believe the community can do it by themselves as you change superintendents.
One of the things that I discovered was that your message had to be simple enough and had to be repeated often enough that people, first of all, just got the words. And one of the things that we do sometimes in trying to be so creative, and we change our own message. We don't think that we can deliver. You got 4 goals. The words ought to be the same every time they roll out of your mouth. And your people ought to be sending those messages back to you, and you should be seeing them in the paper. And I think most superintendents have to see themselves as sellers of their ideas, because your job is to persuade the teachers, the administrators, the board, the community to buy into your vision. And so, and if you don't make the connections for the various subgroups in the community, you can't assume that they're going to make the connections, because oftentimes you will get, oh, this is something new. And if you're not really good at making what this initiative is connected to the strategic plan or explaining how this takes us to another level, they will see it as something totally disconnected to what you said last year. I mean, if you go back and think about your opening message to the district every year, was that an opening message that was that re-emphasized your same basic strategic plan or whatever your major goals were every time you delivered it?
Deb, if you said that you want to get people to buy into your vision, how would you?
And I don't mean my vision. I mean whatever the vision was that you decided was going to guide your administration, whatever the community process was. But at some point, all of us got to a point where the board voted and said, these are our major goals, or these are our benchmarks, or whatever you wanted to call them. Your community said, this is where we're going.
Right. Yeah, I was raising a question. You probably anticipated, though, in the light of like Senji's work, you know, where he talks about this notion of a learning organization and the concept of a shared vision, you know, and talk specifically about, you know, because we stand up somewhere and like announce this is the vision. I mean, if you're a learning organization, how do you develop the team capacity? And I've heard you talk about it, that you've got to have both individual learning, but you've also got to have organizational.
Yeah, I kind of screwed up because, I mean, I came in and John Porter had done a wonderful job in getting the budget, getting all of the organizational pieces in place, had written a plan that was good, but it was too long for anybody to remember. I mean, when I talked to people about what did John do, they couldn't explain it. So what I tried to do was to take his work and condense it into the 4 things that I talked about so that people could know what we were doing and remember it. And I had the executive staff work with me over the summer to craft this document, and then that was my message on the first day when the administrators came back with a plan for them to share it with their staff, get input, bring it back to me. Do you know the board was mad? Because my view was I should have the input of teachers and the communities from the schools, and I was going to bring it to the board. Their view was like, I'm sidestepping the board and I'm doing it. But I'm saying there's nothing in this plan that wasn't in John Porter's plan. It's really just an editing of those ideas. Probably choice wasn't in there. There was a couple of things that weren't there. And giving a little more, the priority was a little resequencing of priority and some wordsmithing. I learned that lesson. But they would have liked to, if they felt that they were now being forced to approve it, because it got a lot of support when it went out and it made sense to people and they liked it, but they thought it should have been. I said, but if I had presented it to you first, I don't think schools would have felt that they were going to have any real input if it went to the board first.
They didn't care.
But the point is, if you want
board
to get it
didn't care.
done, I need the support of teachers and principals.
Yeah, I mean, you know that. They didn't know that.
Yeah, and I'm saying you can change whatever you want, but all I wanted to tell you is that what I'm sending to you has the support of the people who run the school.
I mean, you know, I want to talk about that some more because, and I particularly like you and Bob to respond to this, because I think one of the mistakes that I made, you know, one of the big ones, but I'm not sure I could have exactly how we would have done it differently. We wanted to create the school-based budgeting, but in order to do that, we had to create a model for, and as you all know, I had come in with that Office of Change, which was from lone executives from outside, and you know, the model was developed in concert with people, but probably not as much as it should have been, and I think that first year I didn't consult enough with people internally, and so, you know, there's a lot of reaction to it, and so I regrouped and created like a budget committee that was really made up of principals and all this, but I almost feel like if I had done it that way initially, I might never have gotten to the point that we got to, because I would have been embroiled in meetings for the next 100 years. But on the other hand, you lose something in terms of the buy-in. So I don't, what do y'all think about it?
Well, I'm struck by a sense of urgency now. I mean, I think the stakes have gone way, way higher, that this whole process orientation is a shuck to avoid the real hard work of especially raising the achievement of African American students. So if I were to be a superintendent again, I wouldn't pay a whole lot of attention to school-based management. You know, I mean, it would be part of the fabric, but we got to move. Now, we know some ways to move now to raise the achievement of black kids. And we're going to focus on those, and I think I'd give, I mean, obviously you have to have a process of some sort, but I'd go lighter on the process side of it than I used to do, and more on the directive side of the work that needs to be done. And some of that, you know, I talk to my students like this. I mean, I didn't prepare all these years to lead, to give it off to somebody else. So I mean, look at the statistics for kids. I mean, look at when I left here, the statistics for kids were dismal. They were less dismal than they were when I got here, but, you know,
They're dismal.
you inherited them, you know? So I'm, if there's an agenda, and we come to agreement on the agenda at some level or levels, we've got to move. Because these kids are dying on the academic vine as far as I'm concerned.
And it's very hard.
Yes, I think everybody's caught in that dilemma.
It's- You can't go in with a blank sheet of paper
No,
and say,
let's
and
all
then,
decide.
what is happening, you have blockers in school districts. I don't care how inclusive you plan to be, putting any initiative on the table, it's going to be a group out there that's going to criticize that they didn't get enough information. The teachers union. Board members will use, I don't have enough information to make this decision. You've given them all information. So you're going to have that group out there. And I agree, the sense of urgency is here. I think this is going to be the last time, these next couple of years, we are going to have an opportunity to stand up for public education and the poorest and the neediest children. I think that the end is close because people are asking for change and they're ready for change.
Dude, could I ask you a question?
You always do.
Yeah, no,
Can we
I-
stay on this? Is this
yeah.
one still on this?
Yes, on this
Okay.
question, but if, it was gonna be more of a question about what is public education, so if you don't wanna go there.
I'm still want to
let me
stay on
say that,
process.
Cause I wanna come back
The
to that
difference
question.
between having a sense of urgency and having a balance between
What is public
process
education?
and choices that have been proven that are research-based, and how do you bridge the gap? Because if you're having, and this notion of merging practice and theory, which is a part of your program, it's very difficult to have conversations about stuff that you know it doesn't work. There's 1,000 research studies that says it doesn't work, but you're sitting in a room filled with people who want to do this. And you're supposed to be some type of leader setting a direction for an organization. And I know that we've all faced it. And at some point, you're going to have to make a decision that says, we're going down this road, and we're going to provide the professional development to help you come down this road with us. And they're not going to want to come. But you can't afford to put money into something that you got a pile of paper this high that says, this is not going to get you where you want to go.
But Debbie, how do you, see, I mean, I think this is a very important issue because it also speaks, at least in my mind, I don't know about the rest of you, to the centralization, decentralization question. And I guess after all these years, I'm not sure which one is better or what combination makes sense, and how do you ultimately determine that?
Dean talks about integrated decentralization.
Right.
Right.
And I never been, I mean, if a school wants to do something that they consider decentralized, just build a research-based case
Right.
for what you
That's
want
fine.
to do.
Right, but see,
And I'd be happy to do it.
But what I was getting at, Debbie, was the kind of, you know, what they talk about in business circles as tight-knit, loose properties. And that, you know,
Or loosely coupled
Loosely
system
coupled
is
systems.
another
Right.
term that they use.
Right, but where the tightness is really around
Accountability,
this,
outcomes.
where you're trying to get to.
and the
But the looseness is on giving,
How-
right, but I'm saying.
But
I'm
there's
just
still
saying-
some parameters
Right.
on that
The
looseness
looseness.
of how you can get
But see,
there.
that's what I'm talking about, because if you say to people, well, you have the right to make a decision about the nature of your program, and ultimately, we're gonna determine whether or not your program is successful, not based upon what your process is, but what your outcomes are. And you're sitting there knowing that they're getting ready to pursue something where you think the research says you almost have no chance of having good outcomes if you go down that path. And what I was trying to do was to just raise the question of how do you deal with that? If in fact you're saying we're going to give people a right to make decisions about which way they want to go, although we're going to lay out where it is we want them to be.
Yeah, on that issue, I think we are now in a position, and certainly years before, to disallow people to engage in what I think are artificial debates, and they are considerable distractions, however. from the real agenda for kids. You know, the whole language phonics thing, people are still into that. You know, they're creating mediators to go in and work with the two tribes to see whether or not they can come up with something that's consensual. You know, is it professional development versus staff development, top down, but I just think the people have hired you to come in to set the direction and move what's been already there as a vision, and you're not going to get consensus. I mean, you talked about the barriers that are in every school district culture. They're going to be there, and I just think if there is any airing to do, it's on the side of moving an agenda. It took about 18 months for the notion of performance benchmarks to get seeded into the culture of the entire district in Rochester. And there were criticisms that were made that I didn't come in and check in with everybody. And I said, right. And I wouldn't do it any differently because transitioning into the district, I knew I had a period of time when my stuff was really not going to be challenged on its merits. They would challenge it perhaps on process and who was at the table, which tribe wasn't there in sufficient number, and so on. Now we've got teachers working with kids to do target setting against the district benchmarks. And I would say one other thing on schools rolling out their agenda. If you look at the data, the performance data of students at particular schools, those schools do not deserve the degrees of freedom that they've had before by virtue of them doing what they've been doing. You know, that's another thing that...
You know, on that one, Cliff, this is important. There is research, and Jerome and I used it. I don't remember who did it, but he separates schools into schools that get to go off and do their own thing. Those are the schools that have a track record of meeting your benchmark. Then there are schools where we can collaborate. They are continuously improving. The reason we set it up that way. And then you have failing schools that as a leader, you're saying, I am going to approve and direct what you do. And when you move over, that's right, when you move over into the collaborative, you make some improvement, then we can collaborate. And when you get really, really good, you can go off and do your own thing. And when you communicate it to them in that way, if you don't want that much district involvement, get better.
Right. And then you create incentives for people to be in that group where they
right.
have the degrees of freedom.
But see, I think
the consequences for the other ones.
I think that's a very, I mean, I think it's a very interesting point because, you know, what we have is we're having these swings back and forth from, quote, decentralization back to centralization. And maybe what we're saying is really
That's
not
just like
that.
the phonics whole
that's
language.
right.
That's the wrong question.
They
That's the
trap
wrong
you into that.
That's
Right.
the wrong
Because it's not
argument.
the first and right issue to talk about.
You didn't include me in the process.
Right.
Right, you're right.
Excuse.
You're right.
Excuse.
And when I look at the
You
performance
create
of
more
your school, I
excuses.
wonder what you could have contributed to the
create more
process.
excuses
I'm gonna
for
go
people not
talk.
to be
Let me give
successful.
you another example. I just read an article last week on GE. GE has a mortgage.
General Electric.
Yeah. And what they did was say, you know, we have all of these people deciding whether a person's mortgage is going to be continued or discontinued, but they had a group of 8 people who always got it right. But the 8 people didn't do it exactly the same way. So they put them on a team and somehow let them talk about how they got decisions, came up with some software that then other people could use to enhance their decision-making ability. But in education, we have not figured out how to take what the best people are doing to help the people who haven't been able to use that research to create good schools. And then we feel bad like we're being too dictatorial.
Well, see, the thing is, I really believe that the folks in failing schools don't have a clue. And I'm reminded of visiting a district where one of my students was, and the superintendent's a friend of mine, and he said, look, would you go over and look at the school and just see if you can get from the principal what it's a failing school by the state's definition. So I went over and I said to the principal, seems to me, I visited your school, you've got some problems here. The superintendent is very, very serious about getting the school off the failing list. What do you need? And this principal said, to be left alone. And I went back to the superintendent. The second thing he asked for was a janitor. I went back to the superintendent. I said, you got to remove it. You got to remove it. You may have to close the school down because there's no capacity there to do that. And so I think there's another piece that this failing school is that if these people can't get to, don't want to work towards, don't have the capacity after all the good intervention you want to do, then more and more, my sense of urgency says goodbye. Goodbye. You know, I'd love to redeem you, and back in the old days, I may have, but now, just goodbye. Retire, go sit in a corner, go do whatever you're gonna do, but you can't have control of the school any longer.
But would you carry that same logic to a district? I mean, I'm gonna give you an example, man. I mean, like.
Don't, no names, right?
Right, well, we were in a small school district, you know, in the eastern part of the United States.
Wasn't any district I ran, was it?
No.
No. And both of us went in there with a certain level of arrogance because there's only 7,000 kids in the district, and you know, you're saying, well, shit, how hard can this be? You
How
know?
can you fail with that?
There's one high school.
I could teach them all myself.
Yeah, one high
Drive
school,
the
one
bus.
middle school, you know, a few elementary schools. You know, you can stand on the street and see everybody. You know, so how hard can this be? Well, I'll never go back there, ever. I mean, I left there saying, it's impossible. So, I mean, my question is, in the same way that you made that analysis about a failing school, could we make that same analysis about a district? And the dysfunctionality of that district, Rob, is so deep that unless something fundamental happened, I'm not sure what that is.
Well, there's my problem. I mean,
Right.
you know, if Beverly were here, we could talk about Newark and the state takeover.
Right.
You know, and I tried to help them do some things beforehand to avoid the takeover. When you open up the wound, good Lord. The problem is the state has no greater capacity. I mean, Beverly does as an individual and as an educator, but the state has no capacity to help.
Right.
But you couldn't leave it in the shape that it was in.
Right. But see,
And so I haven't figured out the intervention yet. You know, I mean, it's the issue that Milwaukee's facing now with this legislative piece. If you'd have asked me this 3 years ago, I'd have said no. You ask me that now, and I say yeah. Yes, that's 7. If it's that bad, you know, I think that there ought to be some sort of intervention that says, y'all, enough. Y'all have had your opportunity.
Right.
You have failed at it,
Right.
and now we're going to do something.
Right.
something
There are
different.
bad superintendents out here too.
Yeah, lots
Oh, yeah, right, no
It's
question
not-
about that, they ain't just principals
Yeah,
and
it's not-
teachers.
it's some bad
Right.
superintendents out
But
there.
see, what I'm trying to get at though, Bob, and have you think about, and maybe all of us think about, is that, see, I've sort of concluded that the problem with a takeover strategy is that if the takeover strategy is simply a replacement
Right.
of people, but you don't fundamentally
Change the structure.
change the structure. You don't alter any of the power relationships. All you do is say, instead of this person being in charge of it, this person's in charge of
We're
it.
redistributing.
Well, and what are your?
So you gotta change the architecture design
Right.
of schools
So you
in
can't-
order to be
you-
successful.
I'm coming to the
Got to.
conclusion that you can't reform or restructure situations like that. I mean, you really have to just
I think if you,
and figure out how, whether it's calling good Dr. McGriff here and saying, come down and show me your stuff, or I don't know what it is yet, but it certainly isn't trying to tweak.
Right.
You know, let's go to block scheduling at the high school.
No, no,
We've
no, let me
tweaked
give
for
you, let me
30
give you,
years.
if
We've been tweaking for
if
30
you're talking
years.
about what are we gonna do, and let's use the failing school system as to get us into this notion of how would we change governance and management
Right.
structure. Now, if you can't close a failing school in a district, you have no authority to drastically transform education in that community. Because what you've actually said to the people who are miseducating children is that nothing can be done. Nothing can happen to you. If you cannot hire and fire who you want, you are not going to be able to drastically change people, because in every initial change, there will be some people who refuse to learn anything new, and if they come, they will refuse to do it when they get back in the classroom. So you got to have the power to hire and fire who you want. And the other side of this failing school thing is that if kids are going to continuously be forced to attend a school, so that schools have a captive audience like prisons, people are not motivated to attract their own clients. So I'm saying even with those 3 changes, if schools closed because nobody wanted to attend, or you had the authority to close them because they weren't performing well, and you can hire and fire people, you could begin to transform systems.
And you didn't have to battle every time you wanted to try something innovative that was outside. You wanted to outsource something, or if you wanted to try something, I mean, if you didn't have these battles, and this is where I really complain about state legislatures and their inability to confront some of these issues, because they will, in the states where they have them, strip superintendents of tenure, limit your term, strip administrators in Massachusetts, the principals have lost tenure, but good grief, don't mess with the teachers union,
Yeah, exactly.
and you gotta take the contracts, you know, you still gotta take the big
Right.
contracts through the board. Well, here we got right up to the business community and the teachers unions, and we got cold feet on.
That's why I want you to look at this Pennsylvania law.
Okay.
And when we go by, I'm gonna give it, because I'd like you to examine it, I'd like all of you to examine it and look at it, because what I'm saying to people, and I gotta go out to Pennsylvania in a couple of weeks, what I'm saying to people is, look, you know, you can talk all you want about, you're gonna do this and that, but if you don't change the collective bargaining law, if you don't give people a way to create a totally different design, then why bother?
Right.
And I don't know how many of you have read or agree with what Paul Hill's written about. But see, I think there's a lot of rich ideas in reinventing public education. This notion of what would a contract system look like. I mean, there's some downsides. There's a lot of good ideas in there in terms of what would happen if you separated policy making from service delivery, as far as the board is concerned, and took them out of the service delivery business, the day-to-day micromanagement, and really began to talk about a way where you can set up a system of accountability based on standards, based on a definition of how you're going to assess it and what the consequences are. But the board sets the overall policy and the overall direction, and you really begin to see. I mean, I guess I'm at the point where I think unless we're willing to do something like that, I just don't see how you can change something.
I don't know, Howard, if there's any real will amongst lawmakers to even tweak some stuff, let alone transform some stuff. I mean, the pressure state labor unions put on the Democratic legislatures throughout this country, state and federal, it is enormous. I mean, Democratic convention a couple of years ago, I had board members who, one of them is a counselor in a neighboring district. I mean, the pork barrel culture is just overwhelming.
But see, it's not on the Democrat.
Republicans not doing the same thing.
Republicans not doing, Ohio,
But
the
the point-
Republicans not
Yeah,
doing
but
a
the
thing.
point is, unless we really get, I think, a significant movement in mass from good members of the business community to work on these legislators, this thing here, on this point here, could be lost for some time. I mean, they are not, let alone interested in agreeing to move an agenda. They just show me the money.
But they don't even have, I mean,
Show me the
let's
money.
take this case of the Wisconsin legislature in Milwaukee. They know they're gonna take over, okay? What are they gonna do? Break it up into small districts and have more school boards? Excuse me, how's that gonna
Even if they
improve?
do it.
They do some of
Right,
the
if
same
they
old
do
stuff.
it,
come
how are they
out
gonna do the same
with
stuff?
the wrong antidote.
I mean,
Yeah.
no,
Even if they do it.
Right.
no consciousness of the fact that this has failed in New York City. No consciousness of the fact that it's just tweaking the structure one more time. Don't care.
They'll have the same power relationships.
And they've said to me in Ohio, we are not going to take on the teachers union, James. We are not. The money, and I have a Republican governor, I have a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and I would think that, and with term limits in, I'm saying, folks, do something good for children.
Stand.
You're not gonna be here anyway.
No, you have to understand, term limits only means you go off for a while, you can come back. People would like to get reelected.
Well, they would come off from the Senate and run for the House, and from the House and run for the, that's what they plan to do.
I think
Mr.
this
Manager.
whole thing of the right moving to the center, going back to that is what this is really. So I don't even care anymore whether it's Democratic or Republican, because it
It's the
doesn't,
pork barrel.
it was a Democrat, the Democratic legislature here messed with me just as hard as if it had been Republican. So what's the difference in lots of ways?
See, I guess, what I'm struggling for, and I think what I really want to hear you all talk about, because it would help me, frankly, is it begins with that question about what is public education. And James, you and I have been talking about that for a while, and I am very, very interested in people who I respect, like the people in this room, talking about how you see that question.
Mhm.
Because I have some definite views about some of this stuff, but I'm not sanguine about it, for example, that they're right, because I don't know. It's the frustration of not being able to figure out how do you fight what I see happening to our children every day. I mean, what do you have to fight with if we continue to fight within the current framework? See, that's because I don't know how we win these battles in the current framework.
Let me start it. When the mayor proposed the idea to grant the superintendent the authority to appoint his or her own cabinet level staff, he created a compelling reason within the community to do that. He had to beat up on the board, and there were casualties. No big deal. When it went to Albany, and when the unions, particularly NICET, when they galvanized support around to kill this, it was the business community in Rochester that convinced Pataki that this is the thing that he shouldn't, it wasn't a question of him doing it because it was the right thing to do, that he had to do it. And it was the business community that stepped up, from Xerox and Kodak and the round table that we have in Rochester, that called the question on their fellow Republican, that this has to happen and it isn't a matter of choice. And all the pressure that he was getting, from those unions that were, had all these folks in their pockets, it was enormous. But folks stepped up on the other side and moved the question. And he, he did it. He did it. And it wasn't necessarily what he wanted to do, but he had really no choice. It had to get into that kind of arena versus, oh, this is the right thing to do because kids deserve it.
Right. But what's interesting, and I still want to go back to this thing, is that though you're laying out a strategy where you then have to align yourself with individuals who the so-called leadership in our community view as, quote, right wing. So all of a sudden you're a part of a right wing conspiracy. You know what I mean? I mean, because here, you're sitting here saying in a very clear way, this was a good thing, in your opinion, to have happen. It couldn't happen without, quote, business community support, which, sets up a business labor thing, and where historically our community, at least a large percentage of it, has viewed labor as, our friends and business as our enemies.
But I think
But
it's one of these
that-
false
that's
dichotomies.
No, I know,
but I'm just-
like
but I'm
phonics
raising
and the
the-
language.
Part of your job, again, as a superintendent,
that's-
is the
it's-
education.
it's another-
That's why the labor unions kept us out until.
Right.
Remind them by any means necessary. And is the outcome beneficial for children? But it goes back again to your question of what is public education. And you and I know, agree that if it's free, if it's open to everyone, if it's accountable to a public body, and if it's in the public interest, meaning it prepares kids to do the things that they need to have to be successful in society, then it's public education. It's not public education because the elected school board controls it. There are other public entities that could control public education. Because you have a public school and everybody in it is failing, that school is not in the public interest and shouldn't be able to continue to miseducate children. So it depends on where you really want to be on your definition of public education. The range of options that you're willing to say are available to children to be successful.
But, and I totally agree with what you just said, but when you look at research and you look at the evaluation of your community and you look at the problems in public education, in Dayton, the parents or the community perceive the teachers as doing a good job, but kids are still failing. They looked at the board as not doing a good job. The sense of urgency to do what you just said is not in our culture right there. There's no reason to change, to do the things that you talked about, changing the whole structure. And that's the part that I get so disgusted about. I mean, kids are failing every day. Kids are dropping out. Kids are doing this. And they said, if we could get rid of these children, well, folks, we're sending you, they're not sending us your good children and keeping the bad ones at home.
Reverse.
Reverse, sending us the bad children keeping the good ones at home. They're sending you what we have.
No,
But I disagree. I think that there are surveys that are being done. I'm just talking about the African American community. They're saying the African American community, not its leadership, not its spokespeople. I'm talking about the people who have their children in school. They want choice. They want vouchers. They want charter.
But when time to do it, they don't step forward. They don't step forward. They say they want this, but when time to do it, coming out of Dayton, and I'm
Well, I
talking
can't
out
speak to Dayton. I can only speak to nationally, states
But-
where
but-
I know what.
I think the
Still,
point
the
that
school
James is
district.
raising is real though. It exists out there, we say, in the what do you
Abstract?
call it? In the polls.
Yeah.
But when in the, not the voting polls, I'm talking about in the
Gallup.
you asked
Gallup
me,
poll.
Gallup or Joint Center for Policy Studies. But when the fight jumps out in a local community, with the possible exception of this one, and that's only because I think we've been at it about 20 years. No, really, I mean,
I'm saying
over a long period of time, you don't find the support for the change that you're talking
Because
about.
I identified
I
the
don't
three
know if
lowest
that's right.
achieving schools over a period of time. And the first question, how did you select those schools?
Excuse me, no,
I
you're
said-
talking to the. I'm not talking about the other people. I would be talking about the people in the schools whose kids are being
And-
impacted.
He's talking about the
I'm
same
talking about the same
population.
population. Parents, why did you select? I said, folks, look at the trend over the past 5 years, where you have no kids in the 4th grade in school X that did not pass the proficiency test. 0. That's not even statistically sound.
But people go to
And-
fight
and
change
I
for the
said-
sake of fighting
If
change.
Are
you're
you
talking
all-
to the parent association,
I'm talking to the
yeah.
parents, the teachers, the community, anybody. I said, are you all satisfied? Well, why do you pick out then?
Yeah.
By
Not in my
identifying that school,
backyard.
by
Yeah.
identifying that school, oh, Dr. Williams, you really slam dunk the teachers. But when I'm at the state and they come out with Dayton test scores, they're slam dunking all of us and saying, if you don't change and don't improve, we're going to take over the school district. Now, do we wait for them to do that or do we get involved?
No, you can't-
People say, we're ready to wait. We're ready to wait. We don't want charters in
But
here.
you need to ask them their
We don't-
permission.
We don't want this in here. Why should you bring someone in here, a for-profit company, to come in and give our kids away? Folks, public education, nothing is free. Everybody's making a profit off public
Yeah, I
See, the
education.
thing is, every time a charter school opens, let's say in Massachusetts, it's got a waiting list of hundreds. of
Right, and this is what I'm saying.
And I think in general, it's a pig and a poke. But the fact of the matter is, people are so sick and tired of putting up with school boards and superintendents and principals who don't care and the like that. They're gonna go someplace else. Now, the worst school I've ever been in my life is a charter school in Boston. Made me cry, had to leave because I throttled the man who ran it. So I mean, it's not a panacea, but I'm gonna tell you, they had a waiting list because the parents are sick and tired of sending kids to English High and Dorchester High and all these other places where their kids are failing, where the schools are losing accreditation. So what I know where you two are headed with this, so I don't know if I want to pay attention to y'all, but the issue is, it's not going to look like, it doesn't look like, public education doesn't look like it did 10 years ago. We got 2 cities with vouchers now. We've got charter schools are an accepted peak coin of the realm. They're going, I think Hill's right in terms of people going to begin to contract issues. School boards are almost passe in 4 or 5 cities now, where the mayors essentially have said enough is enough. So the issue is,
And homeschooling is increasing.
will we participate in this redesign of public education, or will we continue to hold on to the same structures that haven't worked and the public sees increasingly doesn't work, and we're losing our allies? I mean, when Reverend Floyd Flake, Representative Reverend Floyd Flake, starts coming out for vouchers and opens his own school for his congregation, you know something's coming up.
But see,
But see, Bob, you know what's important, and I really want to say this with all of you. See, to me, it is important that people like you and me and Debbie, that we have a conversation about this in a way that we could begin to talk together about how to do this. Because people like me, Floyd, I mean, we're running around the country, we're getting battered, and I know I'm gonna get battered. I mean, and I should.
That's your mission in life.
Right, and I should, because I'm unwilling anymore to accept the status quo. I've never been able, but I'm unwilling to like accept structural arrangements that at least I believe will not work for children. Now, I am with you, and I argue in the charter school movement that, hey, charter schools by definition are not good schools. In fact, a charter school isn't in and of itself
not an
anything other than a
instructional
framework to
design.
create an
Create a
instructional design.
Right.
That's right.
And if the instructional design ain't worked for them, it doesn't make any difference that it's
It
taking
ought
place
to
in
be
charter
closed down.
school. It ought to be
Right.
closed.
School.
Exactly, except.
But you can close a failing charter faster than you can close a traditional failing school.
Right.
Which
But
makes it
let
advantage.
me say, the point though that I think is important is that for people like you, Bob, who I respect, for us to sit down and begin to talk about if this is gonna work for kids, what is the best way to try to make that happen? I mean, for example, like we work very hard when we put trying to get the city to authorize charters on the application itself, because my contention is a lot of these schools have come into being with really no design, no how are you going to take care of the finances, no.
Roller basketball.
Right. But while I don't want to put you into the same
Box.
box, there is another box though that we have to create that protects kids, that makes us think that you have some chance of being successful, you know, in what it is you're trying to do.
So accountability of outcomes and some accountability for the process.
Exactly. And so if we're sitting here saying that we really need to get out of this framework that we have, then we need to help and support of people like you and other, the rest of you sitting around this table, who can help us design that, as opposed to the people who say, I'm against this. Because to me, what that means is whether you're against it or not, it's gonna continue to happen.
Right.
But you're more likely to get stuff that won't work for kids. You know what I'm saying? Rather than to say, okay, let's begin to talk about what this would really look like. You know, based on some of your knowledge and some of your experience and et cetera. But it is to acknowledge that we can't leave this thing that we have right now intact the way that it is.
I think we have to reframe the question. And this is, I moved to that level because, believe me, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, I was not there. I would tell you that I was not there. We argued over and over again. How can we utilize vouchers and charter schools to improve public education? Traditional public education. That's how I threw the question out to our community. Vouchers are here, they're not going away and dazing folks. Now, how can we utilize them to improve the traditional public education structure? If you have vouchers over here and they said we want to go after the poorest and the neediest children based on free and reduced lunch programs, free and reduced lunch, the income, then you're going to get some of my really academically challenging students. If you can help that population move. Now I've identified 5 charter schools over here, my 5 lowest achieving schools. You have some challenging students, you're moving up. Then we work on the core. It's nothing, the thing that will happen is to have a collaborative model and you will see Dayton Public School system improving. But how do we get that message out to superintendents, number one, because I'm finding out that I was sort of the Lone Ranger out there in Ohio.
Shit, well, look how long it took to get to you. I mean, if you.
Yeah, it was everybody. It took us.
Think about the conversations you have at the council with the large city school superintendent.
We don't even discuss it at the
Right.
council,
Well, they do it large
which I'm saying, folks, we need to put it on the table, even if we don't, just to make sure we have the information, and to make sure we're at the table to make sure that the poorest and the neediest children are getting a fair shake.
I think I said this earlier, regardless of whether you like vouchers or not, or whether you like charter schools, the only way to approach a community, to make the community healthy, is to continue to assume that all the kids are in public education.
That's, yeah, I
Wherever the
agree.
dollars flow,
Right.
whatever you have
Right.
to do.
That's what I'm saying, we
you know,
reframe the
and,
question.
you know, I took a lot of shit from my colleagues when the voucher thing went down,
If
because
you
I
didn't
didn't
say that, we
sue.
would say you were not acting
I didn't
normal.
sue.
Right.
I told you this one. I did not sue.
Right.
It's a done deal. Okay, let's go.
Right.
Let's go get them. Where are my kids? What's happening to my bilingual kids? You know, what's happening with my special needs kids? What's happening to the kids who got Title I services? Let me figure out, let me convene the directors of these community schools, none of them elite, I might add. I mean, the university school's not.
Right, we're not talking about no elite.
Yeah, we're not talking about elite
Right,
schools here.
right.
So, okay, y'all, now, we got a problem.
Right.
You know, we've got contracts with some of y'all beforehand, we've got now this voucher thing. How are we gonna serve the needs of these children? Now, if there are any lessons to be learned, you know, I'm gonna steal them. I'm gonna steal them.
But Bob, you understand, you were in the 0.1% of superintendents who would approach it with that attitude. You know what I'm saying? Because, I mean, I was on the other side, so I know what you're saying is exactly what you did, which is really what it seems to me we are still struggling to get to.
But I think that if you got James listening to this page, I don't know where Cliff is on this. I mean, I think there are more people that are beginning to look down the road and hear the train.
Right.
And well, now whether they have any ability to get beyond their fear,
Right.
their self-interest and fear is a whole nother question.
One of the things I think that would be helpful here at Marquette is for this center to capture in very clear, coherent ways what happened in James's thinking and others about that, because you're going to face the same, you know, traditional arguments that people will make against charters, whether it's here where James was, where I was. But I think it would be helpful to get the thinking that occurred to move from one point to another point, whether it's whole language and fonts, moving out of that to something that's inevitable that has been mentioned here, because you know our credibility is not going to be hampered by moving from one point, because we've got those principles that are solid and that are focused, and we're just talking about priorities to help move those principles. And I think it would be helpful to do that, because we don't even discuss it at the Council of Great City Schools, because we have board members who are still in that mindset, and superintendents, that they can only think in their comfortable vacuum.
And I'm gonna argue that part of it, well, a good part of it, I listened to the conversation at the large city school superintendents, is a part of it is the financing. And if in fact you held people harmless, which is what I thought Wisconsin was going to do, you wouldn't have, I think in some communities you wouldn't have much of an argument. I can tell you in the state of Florida, if you held districts harmless on their financing and had a voucher program, given the overcrowded nature of the schools down there, they'd have a nice day.
But Bob, let me ask you this.
But our problem is we don't have when we say no, we don't have a design in mind. So our alternative is what? School-based management?
Right. And we leave the argument up to the creative dimensions of people who want to kill it. Well, it's because if it's a Republican governor, it's some evil spirit, and people start conjuring up in their own minds that this is.
Well, there are some evil
Okay,
spirits.
but there are on
Yeah.
both sides,
Right.
this thing, right?
But evil spirits to the point that people won't even discuss it
Right.
because of the messenger,
Right.
and they won't even get to the conversation about the messenger.
But
Okay, let me get to the hole in the
I
harmless
gotta
part.
go down the corridor.
Okay, let's
Take a
stop.
break.